Hello and welcome. I'm turning 40 tomorrow. I know, how crazy is that? And I thought in today's video I talk about 40 things I learned about Sweden since I moved here about 3.5 years ago. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter and get 10 questions to help you to decide if Sweden is the right fit for you. You find the link down in the description below. So since there are 40 different things, I will whiz through them a little bit so the video is not that long. So make sure to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. So the first thing I found out about Swedes is that they're quite trusting. You know, you can see that they leave their strollers outside, or sometimes people leave their laptops in cafes and go to the toilet or something like that, which for me still feels a bit weird because I definitely couldn't do that in London, for example. So yeah, but it feels they're quite trusting, which I think is a good thing. I'm German, but number two is that Swedes are quite punctual and they really value you to be punctual as well. It doesn't matter if you're punctual at work or you have to pick up your child from a birthday party, be punctual. I also learned that Swedes love their traditions. You know, there are quite a few, even like there's a few things around Christmas, you know, which they really value, like Lucia, or other things like a crayfish party. There are a few things which are proper traditional Swedish traditions, and they're here to be celebrated. I also noticed when I moved here to Sweden, and that is number 4, that Swedes are quite environmentally conscious. There's a strong focus on sustainability. And following up on this, number 5 is that Swedes are really great at recycling. It's a big thing here in Sweden, everyone is doing it, and I would feel absolutely strange if I wouldn't recycle as well. Something I learned as well when I moved here to Sweden is number 6, that Swedes are quite humble. They are normally not trying to show off, and there is a connection to jantelagen, and I've seen that in people's characters, although obviously not every single Swede is humble, but the majority I would say is. It's just part of their character. I've been using the Ultra Human Ring for over 6 months now, and I absolutely love it. It's amazing for tracking my sleep and daily activity, and it's a great motivator to stay active. I'm obsessed with seeing green everywhere. It means I'm doing great. The ring even lets me know when a fever is coming before I feel sick. I'm sharing this because you can get 20% off the Ultra Human Ring with the code JES10 or through the link in the description below. But hurry, it's only valid until December the 2nd, which also happens to be my birthday. Consider this your early Christmas gift sorted. Merry Christmas! And I know number 7, I mentioned it many times in my videos, but I love mentioning it because I'm a mom myself. But parental leave here in Sweden is one of the most generous in the world. And there's also some equality between parents. I wouldn't say it's 100% equal, but there is more emphasis on the father also to take care of the child at least a specific time of the whole parental leave you get here in Sweden. One thing I also learned here is that Swedes really love their vacations, especially summer vacations. The majority of Swedes will take off a few weeks, 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks during the summer to really have a proper break and make the most of the Swedish summer as well. It can be a good thing, but it also comes with a few challenges. By the way, if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. One thing I really like here, and that's number 9, is that students get a free lunch and also healthy food. I mean, here in schools, especially in kindergarten and schools, you have not only lunch, sometimes also breakfast. And normally the food is quite healthy, really compared to other countries like the UK. So I really love that. And yeah, I learned that since I came to Sweden. Especially in preschools, but also like in primary school, like the focus is a lot on play-based education. And they go out a lot. It doesn't matter if it's raining or the sun is shining. The kids spend a lot of time outside, which is definitely also something I learned since moving to Sweden. Number 10 is that the education system is free. From like school to university, you don't have to pay anything as a student. And when it comes to equality, it is really a big thing here in Sweden. Of course, they haven't nailed it entirely, but there is a focus on it, especially at the workplace. And there's also less hierarchy, especially when I compare it to Germany, where normally hierarchy is quite a big thing. In Sweden, here they try to be equal and give everyone a voice. Number 13 is that there's quite a big work-life balance in terms of leaving on time. So normally Swedes would not like to receive an email late at night and respond to it. So normally you find the offices quite empty after a certain time. But, you know, it obviously doesn't apply to every company or to every individual. But in general, Swedes love to leave work on time. Number 14 is that Swedes are not so keen to have small talks. I mean, it happens, of course. And I would say there's also one exception when you talk about the weather. Swedes love to talk about the weather. And honestly, I started to love talking about the weather as well because it's such a significant part of living in Sweden. Number 15 is that most Swedes really speak excellent English. I think compared to other countries, they're really on top of the list. Of course, there are exceptions, but I also feel sometimes that people think they can't really speak English, probably because they haven't done it for a while. And I can see that they're sometimes horrified to speak English, and I totally understand them because that's how I feel when I have to speak in Swedish. Number 16 is that here in Sweden, people love secondhand shopping, and you can find things to buy secondhand online on Facebook Market, but also there are quite a few shops here, which probably ties in with the sustainability mindset here in Sweden. You might have never heard it if you're not a Swede, but there is something called Melodifestivalen, which is like a music kind of festival, a bit like Eurovision Song Contest, but just within Sweden. And I think the winner normally does go to the Eurovision Song Contest. But yeah, my daughter started talking about it from her kindergarten. So it seems like it is such a big topic when it's happening and everyone is talking about it. And I feel guilty because I still haven't watched it entirely, so this is on my list to do. Number 18 is that Swedes love minimalist home decor. Some people don't find it very attractive because there's color missing. You know, it's normally like more like white, black, gray, kind of beige, those neutral tones. But I'm actually a fan of minimalist home decor, and normally it's accompanied by a source of light, and I think that makes it actually quite cozy in the end. This is something I definitely only learned when I moved to Sweden, that you can actually queue for your housing. And I also heard or read about that you actually have to do it from a very early age on to get your housing, you know, your apartment, your relatively cheap apartment by the time you want to move out at your parents' place, for example. I probably should sign up my children, but I don't often think about it because as a foreigner, this is normally something you can't really access until you live here, and then it takes years and years until you actually get an apartment. Then number 20 is kind of a follow-up, like renting is quite difficult here in Sweden. I'm very surprised that I learned that when I moved here. It has to do with some regulations and laws, but normally it's very easy to rent maybe a place for 1 or 2 years, but after that you have to move probably somewhere else, and that's why buying is a more attractive thing to do. Or you are in a house queue I just mentioned, but that is not so accessible for foreigners. So when you move here as a foreigner, it can be quite tricky to rent a place long term. And then of course I mentioned that as well. Number 20 is I learned what a fika is, and normally this is coffee accompanied with a pastry, with something to eat and good company. Number 22 is the work-life balance. I mentioned that earlier a little bit, but I meant earlier that people love to leave on time and not overwork much. But also work-life balance here is that people really value their families and want to spend time in the evening with their families and have dinners together. So they really make sure that, you know, work is not everything in their life. Of course, there's always exceptions, but in general, also the government really promotes a work-life balance here in Sweden. Number 23 is like the cultural concept of lagom, and it basically means not too much, but also not too little. And I really like this concept because it's always finding the balance. And honestly, I feel like you will never really hit the balance, but at least you can try to get as close as possible to a balance. Number 24 is that Swedes love the midsummer celebrations. And honestly, I heard about midsummer before I moved to Sweden, but I had no idea what it really means to Swedes, and it's a big deal. And ever since I moved to Sweden, I've celebrated a few times with my Swedish friends, and I also absolutely love it. Number 25 is also a celebration, Lucia Day, and that's around, I think, the 13th of December. So it is during the winter time, when it is quite dark and cold, and the whole kind of celebration is full of light and singing, like to embrace, the cold winter and dark winter which is about to come or arrived basically. And I love the celebration. It's very cozy and very beautiful. Number 26 is still something so small, but I still love it. Every birth here in Sweden is celebrated a little bit with like a meal. If you have heard about my birth story, I mentioned it here because one of my children was born here in Stockholm. So we got a little celebration meal, my partner and me, and we got like little glasses and a little Swedish flag. I put an image here so you can see, but it's something so super cute and nice, and it just adds to the experience. Something I also learned when I moved to Sweden is number 27. Swedes love queuing. And I noticed that when we started in kindergarten, they just show the kids like how to queue. And it's funny that at the pandemic there was a very famous meme where you could see at the bus stop everyone really having their distance, and it's no joke. This is so normal here in Sweden, and it happens every morning. So the pandemic is over, kind of, right? But every morning everyone queues, and they don't queue like this, There's always a gap between people, I thought that was quite funny. And 28 is basically a follow-up where Swedes really love their space bubble. So again, like when you go into a bus, for example, normally you would not find people sitting next to each other. First of all the seats will be filled up singularly. Sometimes people even stand and don't want to sit down because they would be very close to another person. So there is something about Swedes, they love their space. Don't come too close, basically. Number 29, I definitely noticed quite a few times, and I'm traveling into Stockholm quite often. I just live outside of Stockholm, so I take the public transport, and it's really quiet. It's often very quiet in public transport, sometimes even like in the tube, when you take the subway. It's not very loud, barely people talking, especially if it's in the morning. It looks like that Swedes are not really morning people. Number 30, I learned when I moved to Sweden that it is very common to remove your shoes when you enter a house. And maybe you know that or maybe not, but I would also say like, oh yeah, that's very common because I'm so used to it now. But then I watched some films, for example Home Alone, where everyone has shoes on and walks with their normal shoes in the house. There's also a scene where Kevin goes into the bed with shoes, which obviously is a kid, but still I was very surprised that it is not so common everywhere. And of course, something a bit more bureaucratic, number 31, I learned that you really need a person number to get anything done, and that also kind of includes a bank ID, which is two different things, but together it's basically a very strong power where you can get done anything and everything here in Sweden. And number 32 is also a little bit about bureaucracy. But getting around the Swedish tax system is something you really have to learn, and I'm still learning, and I have figured out a few things, but yeah, it's a lifelong learning process here in Sweden. Number 33 is allemansrätten, and yes, I have mentioned it also a few times in my videos, but it is such a Swedish thing as well. I'm sure you can do that in a few other countries as well, but it's the right of public access. You could, for example, put up your tent anywhere where public space, so that makes it also quite appealing to go out into nature and spend some time there, and even overnights. Number 34 is that for Easter and for Christmas, Swedes love to drink Julmust instead of Coca-Cola. So it is something very similar, but people will probably tell you it's not the same, which probably isn't, but there are similarities. And yeah, the Julmust also just comes when it is Christmas and Easter, although Julmust is obviously only for Christmas because Jul means Christmas, but there is kind of the same thing also for Easter, and that's something I learned when I moved to Sweden. Number 35 is that Swedes love coffee. There's a bit of a coffee obsession here in Sweden, which I quite love because I love coffee. My partner doesn't drink coffee, so he can't really benefit from this obsession. But I also have to say that turning 40, just reminding myself when I'm also doing this video, I'm turning 40 tomorrow. I had to reduce my caffeine intake a little bit just because I feel like I'm more sensitive than I was when I was in my younger years. Number 36 is what I learned here is that there are dark and cold winters and quite long dark cold winters. You kind of read about it, but obviously when you're here you experience it. So you kind of have to have a little bit of a unique point of view and put effort into this period of time to make that time wonderful rather than dreadful. So that is a little bit of a challenge, but that is something you definitely have to learn when you move to Sweden. Number 37 is a bit of the opposite. During summer there's a midnight sun, so it's really, really light for a long time. I think the sun sets at 11 p.m. and that's only where I live in the Stockholm area. I think up in the north the sun probably really doesn't set at all, and then it actually rises around 3-4 a.m. which, yeah, it's also something you have to get used to. If you can like darken your windows, you should be absolutely fine, but otherwise it's definitely something to adjust to. Number 38, going back to the winters. It can be sometimes really, really cold, but then you also have to tackle when you go inside. So the best thing is to learn about layering here during Swedish winters. And that's something I definitely also learned since moving to Sweden. 39, we're almost there. 39 is basically that Swedes love nature. And honestly, this is not a surprise. I mean, you would be so fooled if you didn't love nature living in Sweden, because it's everywhere. And even in bigger cities, you have lots of opportunities to be in parks or be by the sea or lakes. And you can go hiking, you can pick berries or mushrooms. There's so many things you can do. And yeah, that's what Sweden is famous for, right? Nature. And finally, number 40 is that there is a love for simplicity and functionality. Especially simplicity. It doesn't obviously apply to everyone, but when you look also on YouTube, you will find quite a lot of, content around the simplicity of living in Sweden, maybe living more rural, having your own house and enjoying just the moments, being in nature as well. A lot of things I mentioned tie into this one kind of point, number 40, where Swedes love to live a simple life. And of course I don't mean everyone, and you can even live a simpler life like in the suburbs or even in the city. And I think I've learned this since I moved here to Sweden, to take things a little bit slower and to be a little bit more relaxed. Here we go. These were 40 things I learned about Sweden since I moved here 3.5 years ago. If there's anything you learned as well from Sweden, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I hope I see you in my next video. Hej då!